Hi everyone, I'm Dale Smith, aka Journo Dale, and we're here to talk about Canadian politics. This week, in these pandemic times, there's two words that I kind of wanted to reinforce for a lot of our viewers because they're coming up a lot, and I don't think that the government is necessarily explaining these concepts very well. And so those two are capacity and jurisdiction. When it comes to capacity, why I think we need to be having this conversation right now is everyone is demanding a lot of things to happen all at once, and there doesn't seem to be enough acknowledgement that there simply isn't physical and human capacity to do everything that everyone's demanding. And it's one of these things where I think we need to actually say to people, things can only go so fast. We can only do so much at a single time. We know that you want things to happen right away because you're stressed, but we simply can't go any faster. A good example of this are with the emergency payments that they are setting up and instituting. And part of that is because we simply didn't have a system that could deliver this immediately. We're hearing a lot of things like demands for, send everyone a check for $2,000 or direct deposit or however, but we don't have a capability to do that because there's no single database that's got social insurance numbers and addresses for everyone in the country. The CRA has a fairly extensive database that has a lot of this, but it's not complete and it misses a lot of things. Even if we just set it for everyone's tax return for last year, people have moved, people have died, other people have been born, there's people who haven't filed their taxes in years. There's a lot of these kinds of barriers that exist. So a solution like that, it sounds great, but it's not practical. And so what they had to do was say, okay, well, we'll use this existing system and we'll use that as the basis by which to ensure that we can get this benefit out to people. But it's going to have to require an application process because we can't just send money to everyone. The system simply can't do that. These computers aren't magic. And nobody's actually saying that either. The closest we've heard is Bill Morneau saying you can't just push a button. They have to basically reprogram the system in under 3 weeks in order to ensure that it's got the capability to push this money out to people. And there hasn't been enough acknowledgement that this is the kind of capacity challenge that the government's facing. And so I think that's something that we need to keep in mind and that we need to really be aware of when it comes to why things take as long as they do. Same thing with the wage subsidy that they're promising for businesses. They're saying 3 to 6 weeks, and everyone is saying, well, 6 weeks is too long. And that may be the case, but there is simply no way to get money out the door faster. And that's something I think that we need to be aware of, and frankly, the government needs to have a little more candor about that. There are structural and physical and human limitations to how fast this can happen. So we need to kind of keep that in mind. The second part about jurisdiction is something that's become a real bugaboo of mine in the last week to 2 weeks, as my reply column on Twitter is flooded daily with people who are constantly demanding the federal government do something about rent. And we have a lot of reporters asking the federal government, why aren't you doing stuff about rent? And the answer there, of course, is that rent and landlord and tenant legislation is provincial jurisdiction. There is nothing the federal government can actually do about that. Again, they don't have a database where they can just send money to renters. That it doesn't work like that. So we need to keep that in mind. And again, it would be great if the government could actually articulate that, hey, we can't do anything about this. This is the purview of the premiers. We've asked them to, come up with a consistent approach. But this is something that we can't do anything about. But they're not saying that. They're saying things like nothing is off the table, which isn't helpful because it just creates expectations that they can do something even when they really can't. And on top of that, I've had all of these bizarre suggestions being thrown at me, like the government could enact the Emergencies Act in order to take over rent as a federal power, and therefore they could institute some kind of national rent control or a rent freeze, and that's just not feasible at all. Let alone the fact that the Emergencies Act is the tool of last resort for a government. You do not want to invoke this for any particular reason unless it's absolutely dire. And yes, it feels like what's going on in a lot of people's lives right now is dire, and I get that, but we can't just invent federal powers out of thin air. The Constitution doesn't work like that. The mechanisms of government don't work like that. And there's no magic wand in any of this. And this is kind of one of those points that I just really want to drive home with people, is that we need to be conscious of the limits that the federal government has when it comes to this kind of situation. And it's kind of frustrating because we are looking to them to provide a lot of this leadership and guidance and support, but they can't do everything. Provinces have a role to play beyond healthcare, and I think we need to be conscious of that, and ensure that when people start making crazy suggestions, that we kind of calm down and look at this rationally and realize that there are limitations to what can happen. So I just wanted to really impart that this week, and aside from that, hope that all of you are keeping well. And that's everything for this week. Join us again next week for some more Canadian politics. I'm Dale Smith, that's at journo_Dale on Twitter. And don't forget to like the video, share, subscribe, and support us on Patreon. Thanks, everyone.